question lane. Solving problems through the process of questions and answers.
There's been a misnomer that white men are the main perpetrators of racism. That if we get rid of the big bad white man, racism will be over. It's not really white women or white children. It's just white men. What role do you think white women and white children play in the system of racism, white supremacy?
Well, children, to the extent that they adopt the views of their parents, most kids do that. Most kids listen to and respect the views of their parents. Those views happen to be anti-race, anti-black, and there's a good chance the child's going to grow up with those kinds of views. But as far as women, some of the most rabid racists in Florida history have been white women. Now, mind you, there was an association, I forget the exact name of it, but it was an association for the prevention of lynching, and was headed by white women with some help from black women. But the view that white women were not subject to racist views is totally ridiculous. In some instances, they utterly supported it. For example, it was a common thing for a white woman who was caught in a compromising position with a black man, having sex with a black man secretly. It comes out, and then she would accuse the black man of raping her, of forcing himself on her. Very, very common. I can give you case after case, including Rosewood, where this, and that still happens today. So white women don't get any free pass from me. Now, you you will be able to show that in terms of acting on violence towards blacks. Men were the ones who would organize themselves in mobs and go out and kill people, but often at the behest and encouragement of white women who totally were in congruence with their views.
You briefly spoke about the role that white women played as it relates to being abusive towards black domestic female workers. Can you explain some brief examples of how that mistreatment occurred?
Well, yes, it was typical for black women who worked in the homes of white people, white women, to be subject to all kinds of unfair, not just in terms of payment, what they would be paid for their work, but tricks that would be played on them. For example, when my mother was a maid, she told me that one of the white ladies that she worked for would put a penny under a rug. And then if that penny was still there when my mother left, it meant that she didn't clean the house good. All kinds of things to question the honesty of black women who were working in these homes. It was. I don't mean to suggest that all black women who worked as domestics were abused, although I think most of them were abused in terms of pay because they didn't get paid what would have been fair for their work. But just one example, when a white lady, a boss lady, would bring a maid home, including my mother who was a maid and my grandmother, the maid had to ride in the back seat. You couldn't sit up front with the white lady. My mother couldn't let her boss lady know that my father owned a Cadillac, because if they saw the Cadillac, they'd think that we didn't. What are you doing? Why do y'all have such a nice car? So my father would have to park the car across the street before the white lady brought my mother home, so she wouldn't see that nice car that my dad had. So, you can overstate it, because I also know that my mother worked for white women who were very helpful to us, who would send food home, who would give money when my mother needed it. But overall, I think domestic workers were exploited economically, were mistreated psychologically, and were subject sometimes to abuse in terms of how they were supervised by the people they worked for.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe a lot of black domestic workers, specifically female, was tasked with being a nanny, raising the kids, nurturing the kids. I'm talking about of white children, that is, male and female.
Yes.
What role do you think that black domestic females inclusion into their lives, being nurturing figures at early ages, shaped as it relates to them being future racists?
I mean, the children, the white children were nurtured by these black women?
Well, I mean, a lot of white children during the 40s, 50s, and 30s, they were supervised by black domestic female
raised by, you're right,
raised.
about even given breastfed by them.
What
Yes.
as nurturing as a mother and child could be, even though they were not their mothers.
Yes.
What effect do you think that had on their upbringing and their potential role in being future racists?
It was what psychologists call fencing, racial fencing. That is, the person will put a psychological fence around a black person and say, now, Mama Sue is all right. She raised me. She's a good nigga. Her husband, old Joe, these are good niggas. So those blacks that some whites had a close personal relationship with, domestic relationship with, they could excuse them as being different. But that did not influence the attitude about blacks in general beyond those who they had close contact with. I mean, I would hazard a guess that there were Florida sheriffs and constables, white, who were breastfed by black women, and they still led lynching mobs later. So there was no guarantee that the person was going to grow up with a particularly sympathetic attitude towards blacks just because they were breastfed by a black woman. Then some of this goes back to the vanity of white women who were so anxious to not have their figures ruined because they were nursing their babies, would have a black woman do it. Would have such social obligations, those who were of a status that they had those kinds of obligations, could just leave the children with a nanny and go out to the teas and all the kinds of things, bridge playing that they wanted to do, and leave their children in the hands of black women. Now, a big cost of that was on black children who were neglected because of the non-presence of their own mothers who were raising other people's children.
Can you describe the concept of alien Negroes in Miami?
Oh, yeah. Gosh. We still are living with that. Well, when Miami was founded, late 1890s, the black folks who came to Miami and to Florida in general came from two different directions. Many came from Georgia and South Carolina into Florida, North Florida, and then on down as Florida developed as a state. And then many others came from the Bahamas and other parts of the Caribbean, but mainly the Bahamas. And these people came first to Key West, and then they would migrate up the Florida chain of keys into South Florida. So you have this melding of blacks from two different cultural originations. And there was a view in Miami that among whites now, we talk about black views, African American views about Bahamians as well, but speaking now about how early Bahamian residents in Miami and Dade County were viewed by many whites, they were seen as alien Negroes, not like the southern Negroes that were more easily understood and controlled. Black Bahamians who came in to Florida in the early 1900s, late 1890s, considered themselves to be subjects of the British Crown, as indeed they were. And many of them had a very haughty attitude about African Americans, that you all just got out of slavery. Bahamians have not dealt with slavery for a much longer period of time. So there were ethnic and cultural tensions even between blacks, African Americans, and Bahamian immigrants. But the view that many whites had was that Bahamians are more dangerous, more likely to resist being made to respect certain kinds of social norms, that they were more likely to participate in anti-white violence, as indeed they were. The first race riot we had in Miami was in Coconut Grove, led by Bahamians, who simply would not accept the kind of oppressive tactics that whites were using at the time. So, yes, there was a view that they were alien, they didn't really belong here, but they were needed for their labor. So they were kind of tolerated for that reason. But that was the use of that particular term at the time.
So I'll just restate to clarify. So correct me if I'm wrong. So at the time, white people who were in control, they suspected all the Negroes, whether they were Southern Negroes or Bahamian or other Caribbean Negroes.
That's
They
right.
were
Black was black.
The black was black, and they were not confused about that.
Well, unless the Bahamian opened his mouth.
Okay.
And then, they tell that Bahamian twang, and that was an alien nigga.
Okay. But the blacks that were here in the United States, descendants of slaves, if you will, they were confused about racism a bit, and the Bahamians were confused about racism a bit because the Bahamians were out of slavery for a little bit longer and had a little bit more cornbread or pecans or whatever the currency we want to use, which made them think they were better than the Southern.
Well, in some sense, in some regards, they were better. They were better educated, for example.
Mm-hmm.
They came out of a British education system in which Bahamians tended to have more education than did African Americans who were from the South. So in that sense, they were correct. But see, now you get into my own prejudices, because the Bahamians overplayed that and considered themselves to be superior to African Americans, which caused a lot of problems. My father, who was our family goes back to Georgia, did not like Bahamians. He thought they were, I don't want to perpetuate, but I don't think my dad's views were all that different, but he thought Bahamians were too loud, ate too much fish, had this strange religion, Episcopalian. The women were too mouthy, too bossy, and the men had little butts. And he said they wouldn't stop working. And my dad was a longshoreman. He said the Bahamians wouldn't take a break. The African Americans, when the break time came, they'd stay an extra 25 or 30 minutes. But the Bahamians be right back on the job. So, the black men would say, hey, yo, goddamn, why don't y'all slow down? Shit, what you trying to do here? So you had these tensions on the docks in Miami between Bahamians and African Americans. And, that was part of what I grew up with.
So it'd be safe to say that they were confused about their
place. So you keep using that term confused.
I'm using the term confused because understanding your place within society and that we are all, just to quote Daily Fuller Jr., we're all, as non-white people, we are all at the bottom of the slave ship. We're all victims of racism, white supremacy. Some people are in slightly better positions. God save the queen.
Then I agree with you. I see where you're going. Yes, I think there's confusion.
Meghan Markle, she just got married to Prince Harry, if I'm not mistaken. Wow, that's a great achievement for African Americans. We finally have some melanated people in the royal family. She's in a different position, but she's still at the bottom of the slave ship with the rest of us. Now, does she get a little bit more cornbread than I do? Possibly. Does she get a little bit better treatment? Possibly. But she's still a victim.
Well, all right. I think I agree with you about that. Black is still black. It don't get at a certain level. But you also have to recognize the fact that if a person becomes a black person becomes extremely privileged, extremely wealthy, extremely well known, a black athlete, a black entertainer. For that person to say, well, we're still black. I'm just as subject to being discriminated against as you are. And here, a multi-millionaire telling me, or somebody who has less than I have, that we're all in the same boat together. We all came over in the slave ship, and I'm just as much a risk as you. Well, that's stretching reality a little bit to me. True, that person could be beaten up on the street by a white police officer as fast as you or I could be. But you still have certain privileges if you're a black person and you're rich and well-educated that other blacks don't have. And yes, you can trace all that back to the slave ship. We all came over in the same condition. But the differences over time, the privileges that develop over time based upon skin color, mixed bloods, having certain advantages over field blacks, all of those things translate into differences that really are real. But I guess I would agree with your use of the term confusion based upon that description.
And just one more comment before we proceed. I just want to make sure, just for the record, that what you said is 100% accurate. You know, the more money you make, the more of prestige that you get in the society. We need to acknowledge that that does, to some degree, separate us non-white people to some degree. But we just have to keep in mind what system we're in, and the consequences of not understanding that system. The pound cake speech that Bill Cosby gave about black people need to pull their pants up, that's true. Black people need to speak with better English, that's true. Black people need to get more educated, that's true. Black people need to avoid portraying a gangster image, that's true. But he's not in such a great position these days. And Morgan Freeman was asked on, recently about, not recently, but I recall an interview that he gave about race not being an issue, and
that's ridiculous.
It's not as much as a problem as it was before. And
well, that's true. It's not as much of a problem as it was before.
One of my favorite actors he's getting ready to bite the bullet. But again, that's racism, white supremacy.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Stay up to date for more videos by clicking the bell notification icon and following our social media. For any of the people, groups, companies, or videos that were referenced in this video, don't forget to check the description and or the pinned comment section. The question lane, solving problems through the process of questions and answers.